There you go.
Well done, dummy. Well done.
Hell yeah.
Ada, thank you. Fire.
Oh.
Curiosity. I've heard the term, but given the fact that every single person sitting down here in this video owns a cat,
please don't say that.
I don't really feel like saying it.
No.
But I think I think there's a phrase that comes to my head. FAFO. Nick's nodding his head because he knows what it means. Kate, do you know what FAFO means?
Mm-mm.
Fuck around, find out.
I've just never heard it called FAFO.
Yeah. So, yeah, trademark
One I
it
heard
here,
lately
everybody.
that I was like, why is everybody saying that? And I don't know what it means is FOMO.
Fear of missing
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, fear of missing out.
I was like, what? When the hell did that get invented?
I remember when Michael from Vsauce said it years ago during one of his videos.
I started hearing it more recently because I started playing Genshin and Star Rail. And so that's a big thing in those communities, FOMO on characters. That you
fear of missing out on characters.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, so people spend money because of FOMO.
Oh.
So...
Whereas
I'm just like, yeah, I wanted the character really bad that I started playing for, but I had enough fun with the game that I was just like, it's whatever if I don't get the characters I really want.
I hear you. Well, for me, it's for whenever I hear the term FAFO, I think to myself, yeah, the more you do F around, the more likely you are going to find out. And in nature, FAFO can come at you at any time because, you're never really truly 100% alone when you're in nature.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say it, but, you hear something like in the woods, like snap in the distance, like a twig snap in the distance. All of a sudden you think to yourself, is that another person? Or is it something else? I don't know. But needless to say, Mr. Ballin has a story here that I think a lot of people will be able to relate to because I've been out in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had moments where I've had that little chill of fear go down my spine like I'm being watched. And I made it out, but I wasn't sure what completely was out there.
Yeah.
And I remember it was when I was on one of my walks back to Little Stony Falls. Awesome little place to go, by the way. Pretty decent walk. But, yeah, walking back there and then just on my way back, I just felt like this chill go down my spine like something was there. And I was just like...
Did you ever figure out what it was?
No.
Oh.
Still to this day, I don't know if I was being watched or if it was just paranoia. But I didn't want to find out.
Yeah.
I didn't want to find out if it was being watched.
I've never had anything like that during all of my outdoors excursions.
But we have Mr. Ballin video queued up here. His curiosity had a terrifying ending. I don't know what else to say other than let's check it out.
Today's story is about a man and his quest for the perfect photo. He would eventually get it, but it would cost him dearly. We will show you his picture at the end of today's video. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please offer to buy the like button a brand new set of AirPods, but just give them regular earbuds with the cords cut off. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
All right.
Saturday, April 25th, 1987 was a beautiful spring day in the mountains of northwest Montana. It was exactly the kind of day that 40-year-old Charles Gibbs and his wife Glenda had been waiting for months. The sky was clear, the sun was bright, and
Yeah, I've heard people talk about Montana. Yeah, Zach talked about Montana, and I asked him, like, how would you, like, encompass it as a place? He looked at me and he was just like, God's country. And I was like, all right. So it's beautiful. It's like, oh, it's beautiful. But you're at the mercy of God out there. It's like, one of my favorite movies, Wind River, luck don't live out here. There's the strong and there's the weak. And if you're strong enough, you get to go home.
Glenda had been waiting for months. The sky was clear, the sun was bright, and the breeze was warm. And so, at around 9 a.m. that morning, Charles and Glenda had a quick breakfast inside of their house in the rural city of Libby, and then they started stuffing their backpacks full of their hiking equipment. Charles and Glenda were going to go to Glacier National Park, which is a 1 million acre wilderness preserve with alpine meadows, forests, rivers, and lakes that are so bright and crystal blue, they almost look like they're glowing. The park is ringed by snow-covered mountains, and it's dotted with glaciers, which are huge masses of pure ice that jut up out of the rock and make you feel like you've stumbled onto some ancient frozen planet. The park is actually so otherworldly that when Hollywood producers were looking for a location to shoot the heaven scene in the big movie What Dreams May Come, they chose Glacier National Park as their location. And for Charles and Glenda, this place practically was heaven. It was the place they went all the time to go hiking, especially on beautiful sunny spring days. After packing all of their gear, Charles and Glenda made their way out the front door and began heading to their car, when as they were walking, Charles suddenly stopped short, shook his head, turned around, and ran back inside the house. When he came back out again, he was carrying his camera bag, and so he ran over to the car, he sat down in the driver's seat, and he grinned at his wife, and he held up the bag, and he said, "Now we're ready." Both Charles and Glenda worked for the public schools in Libby. Glenda was an elementary school teacher, and Charles drove a school bus. But like a lot of people who lived in Montana, their real passion was the outdoors. And for Charles specifically, his real passion was wildlife photography. He was actually a pretty accomplished amateur photographer. He'd had a couple of photo exhibits locally, and he'd gotten a few of his pictures published in the local newspaper. But what Charles really wanted to do with his photography was get one of his wildlife pictures published in a weekly publication called the Hungry Horse News. The Hungry Horse News was a tiny publication, but they had won a Pulitzer Prize, which is the highest award for American journalism. And the Hungry Horse News was famous for its nature photography. Charles had been submitting his work for years to the Hungry Horse News, but the editor kept rejecting them, telling Charles that his photos were totally beautiful, but they weren't dynamic enough. Nothing was happening in these photos. And so that morning, on the couple's drive to Glacier National Park, Charles began talking out loud to Glenda about what strategy he was going to use for his photographs during their hike. You know, what route they were going to be on, and what was the best angle to take certain pictures. And as Glenda listened to Charles, she just smiled to herself, because it was like no matter how many times Charles got shot down by the Hungry Horse News, she knew he was never going to give up. And so she loved his determination and just unflappable attitude about his craft. At around 11 a.m., Charles and Glenda pulled off the highway and began heading towards the trailhead where they would start their hike that day, which was located at the base of Elk Mountain on the southern border of the park. The route they had chosen for that day was not one of the most popular at the park. And the reason for that was the trail was really steep, and in certain parts of it, it was fairly overgrown, and so really only the most hardcore hikers would go up this trail, of which there weren't that many. And so Charles and Glenda were used to being on this trail and seeing no one. But they preferred it that way. They loved being alone out in nature. Finally, they reached the gravel parking lot right at the trailhead, and Charles parked their car, and then he and Glenda hopped out. They grabbed their bags and then began walking on this trail. The first mile of this trail brought the couple out along an abandoned road, and then over some railroad tracks, and then out into this beautiful field full of white flowers. And then the trail really started to get difficult because it basically went straight up the side of a mountain. And as they walked up this really steep part of the trail,
It doesn't look
Charles
fun to
was
walk up.
Not really, no. Like, I've been on walks before, like through certain parks, and there's certain places like the one I forget where it's at, but it's about 20 miles away from here. Me and me and my friend Jesse, we basically just went there, and when we got there, there was this bridge. There was an old wooden bridge. That was it was pretty tall, and it was a long bridge that crossed this little ravine that you had to go through, or that that went through the entry part of this path. We get there, and as soon as we start hiking on this trail, we start walking down it, and I look, and a tree has fallen down and has knocked out the bridge that goes over this little ravine. So you'd think, oh, let's turn around and go back.
Nope, you crossed the ravine.
Not Jesse.
Oh.
Jesse was just like, at first he walked up to the edge, he's just like, yeah, we can't jump that. And then he's like, okay, let's look. Yeah, they're right over there. And we walk over and we get to this pathway that walks around the ravine, and we're walking around the ravine, and I just remember just like looking down at it, and I was just like, and I had about this much space. Like we were standing on the pathway that went around it near the edge of the ravine. I was just like, God, I hope I don't slip and fall and fall in head first on this thing, because I'm sure it would kill me, but it would hurt a lot with all the hits that I would take before I eventually died. Yeah. Anyway, we're looking at that, and I stared at it. I thought I'd only been staring at it for a little bit, but then Jesse's like, Nate! He yells at me from the other side, where he's already gotten over it. He's like, Nate, what's going on, man? You stand there for a little bit. I'm like, sorry, your mind just gets, your mind wanders and just goes a bunch of places whenever you think about stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's what it was. And we got over it, and we finished the trail hike and everything. I remember us coming out on the other side where the lake is, and I was just like, damn. It was a lot of fun. It was tiring, but a lot of fun. I wouldn't mind doing hikes like that on a more regular basis. Because it took about an hour and a half, maybe. Hour and a half, 2 hours for us to finish the whole thing.
Non-stop taking pictures of everything he saw. There were deer and mountain goats, and at some point the couple reached a clearing on this steep section where they could look down and see a lake.
Those bighorn sheep. You ever heard them
so of course Charles
collide heads?
Of that
Yeah.
too.
Sound like a gunshot.
Days before digital photography, and so all these pictures that Charles was taking, he couldn't actually see. He needed to go home and develop the film to see if anything he took was worth keeping. But as Charles and Glenda continued their hike up this mountain, Charles was getting more and more excited about some of the shots he was getting. He felt like they were going to be really, really good, and Hungry Horse News was going to finally accept his work. The couple made it to the summit of this trail by early afternoon, and from up there, they had this beautiful panoramic view of all these jagged mountaintops that were covered in snow, separated by these huge valleys and prairies, and Charles and Glenda were the only ones up there, and so they had this unbelievable view all to themselves. Wow. And so the couple would eat the lunch that they brought with them.
It doesn't look real in certain
on this
regards.
rocky outcropping, kind of looking out over this stunning view. And then when they were done, they packed up their stuff and began heading back down, because they knew they wanted to get off of this trail and out of the park before sundown. It was just about 5 p.m. when Charles and Glenda had reached the final slope of this steep section of the trail, and they were getting closer and closer to that big open field with the white flowers. And as they're going down this last section of steepness, Charles suddenly grabs Glenda and stops her and puts his fingers to his lips, and then turns around and points behind him. Charles was visibly excited about whatever he was pointing at, but when Glenda looked in the direction he was pointing, she couldn't see anything, but she obviously knew that whatever he was pointing at, Charles wanted to take a picture of it. Now, Glenda, by this point, was really tired from the hiking and just wanted to go back to the car and go home. I mean, after all, Charles had taken dozens and dozens of pictures that day. Like, we don't need to get one more. And so Glenda would look at Charles impatiently, basically suggesting, like, come on, we can come back another time. But Charles didn't budge, and he looked at her like, please, I want to get one more photo. And so Glenda kind of did one of these and was like, okay. And Charles said, thank you, I'll meet you at the car. And so Glenda stood there and watched as her husband got his camera out, turned around, and began slowly making his way back up the trail. And again, Glenda's looking. She can't see what he's going to take a picture of, but she figured, you know, he had his plan. And Glenda, she turned around and began heading back down towards the car. It didn't take long for Glenda.
Mountain lion, bear.
Mountain lion, bear, maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of nature. Bears are very prominent in Montana as well, especially Kodiaks.
To get back to the car. She got there right around 6 p.m. And when she got there, she hopped inside, sat in the front passenger seat, turned on the radio, and then she expected to have to wait for maybe another 20 minutes or so for Charles to finish up and come join her. But Glenda, after sitting in the car, was so tired that she accidentally fell asleep. And when she woke up again, she was kind of disoriented, and immediately she looked to see if her husband was in the car with her, and he wasn't. And she's looking outside. It's getting pretty dark out. She glanced at her watch. It was 7 p.m., which means Charles had left her for at least an hour by this point. And she's thinking, there's no way Charles would have been gone for an hour. He would never do that. He would never leave me alone like that. And so Glenda began glancing around her, kind of half expecting to see Charles just outside of their car, you know, doing something. But she was all alone. There was no other hikers or cars. Charles wasn't there. And so starting to panic, Glenda got out of her car and began hustling back onto the trail to go look for Charles. And so she's yelling for Charles. She's looking around. It's getting darker and darker, and there's no sign of Charles. He's not calling back to her. It's just totally silent. She walks along the abandoned road. She reaches the railroad tracks. She gets into that meadow with the white flowers, and still there's no sign of Charles. And she gets to the base of that steep section of the trail, and she's looking up at all these trees and how dark it was getting, and she's thinking to herself, if Charles is in trouble somewhere up there, there's no way I can help him by myself in the dark with no equipment. No one knows I'm here. I mean, this is an emergency and I need help. And so Glenda would scream a few more times for Charles, and after not hearing any response, she turned and ran all the way back to her car. She turned it on and she drove to the nearest ranger station.
Damn.
Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. When I was younger, there were several people I was very close with who struggled mightily with depression.
I don't remember him doing a mid-roll advertisement before.
I've seen him a couple times.
But the reality is, it's the person who is struggling who needs to go out and get help in order to get better. You can't just magically make them feel better. And so because of this,
but do your best to go to a real therapist, because I've heard so many things about how BetterHelp is just awful. It's apparently a big scam.
Well. Oh well.
By the time I was an adult, I was...
This mid-roll has been brought to you by... Mr. Ballin, but it has been, you know, subverted by low expectations.
When she got there, she ran inside and immediately told the ranger where her and Charles had been, which trail they were on, and where roughly they were on this trail when she had gone to the car and Charles had turned around and gone uphill to take a picture of something. And as Glenda told the ranger all these details about where they were inside of the park, he really started to look worried. And when Glenda was done explaining, he told her that, yes, we need to go right now and look for your husband, but I can't have you on that trail. It's too dangerous. And so this ranger had Glenda wait at the ranger station, and the ranger, by himself, headed back to the trailhead to go looking for Charles. And so the ranger, he gets to the trailhead, he hops out, he's got a rifle and a flashlight, and he begins walking along this trail. And by now, it's dark out. And so he's looking straight ahead with his flashlight and scanning side to side. He's calling out for Charles, and he's walking this trail. He gets all the way across the train tracks, through the meadow, and he gets to the steep section, and he actually begins going up this part of the trail until roughly the area where Glenda had described Charles going one way and her going back down. And when he got there was no sign of Charles, and so the ranger just took his rifle and fired 3 shots into the air, hoping that that might get Charles, if he was in the area, to hear him and call out or do something to indicate where he had gone. But after firing his gun, the ranger heard nothing. By this point, it was approaching midnight, it was totally pitch black outside, and the ranger knew that at this point, Charles was missing, and they really needed to organize a true search party to try to find him. But they would have to do that the next morning when they had light again. And so the ranger called out a few more times for Charles, and after not hearing anything, he reluctantly turned around and made his way back to his truck and drove back to the ranger station, where he would tell Glenda that he could not find her husband and they would now have to wait for sunrise. At sunrise the next morning, 20 searchers arrived at the trailhead where Charles and Glenda had been, and these searchers had dogs, and all the dogs had Charles's scent from some clothes that was in Glenda's car. And so this big search team very slowly and methodically began moving down this trail. And so they went across the abandoned road, over the train tracks, through the meadow with the white flowers. They got to the steep section of the trail, and they got all the way up to that point where Charles and Glenda had separated, and Charles had gone uphill to do whatever he was going to do. And it was at that point on the steep section that one of the searchers' dogs picked up Charles's scent and took off running uphill. And the searcher, whose dog this was, took off running after the dog, and the dog, it went up for a little while, up this steep rocky outcropping, and then it turned and began going down again until it reached a different meadow, so not the same one they walked through with the white flowers. This was farther away to the right, and in this meadow, the dog, who still very much had the scent, began to slow down, and it went straight for this tree. That was kind of a standalone tree right at the base of this steep section, and this tree had low hanging branches, maybe 5 feet off the ground, and the dog went right up to the tree, and then it stopped for a second, and the searcher by this point had caught up to the dog, and so he's looking at this tree, and he sees the ground looks really disturbed, and there's deep gouges in this tree, and then the dog went around this tree and sprinted another 50 feet or so, and then stopped, like it had found something. And when the searcher caught up to his dog, he looked down and he found what they feared the most. It was Charles, and he was deceased. His body was totally mangled. His arms and legs were eaten away. There were deep cuts and gouges all over his body, and there was a blood trail from Charles all the way back to this tree. Also, just a few feet from Charles's outstretched hand was a camera, Charles's camera. Now, it was obvious that something horrific had happened to Charles, and there were clear signs of a struggle that took place near this tree, and then also over here where he was found, there were clear marks on the ground that there was some sort of fight that happened right here. But, interestingly, Charles was carrying a gun, but it appeared that he did not unholster it and he didn't fire it. Instead, it almost looked like whatever was happening to Charles, he refused to put his camera down, which is why it was so close to his hand when he finally died. And so it was decided that the only way to determine what happened to Charles would be to develop his camera, to figure out what he was taking pictures of before he died. And so authorities would send off Charles's camera roll to be developed, and 2 weeks later, when they got it back, they couldn't believe what they saw. The photos very clearly told the story of what happened to Charles. This is what happened after Charles left his wife on that trail. When Charles stopped his wife and signaled to her that he wanted to take one more picture up the trail, he had found a photographic opportunity of a lifetime. The warm spring weather that had drawn Charles and Glenda out of their house to Glacier National Park had also woken the grizzly bears in the park from their hibernation. And what Charles had seen up the trail was a mother grizzly bear and her 3 cubs. The first
Dude, you do not mess with grizzly cubs. You do not mess with any bear cubs.
No, because
you go the opposite fucking direction.
You see them, mama's not far. And if she thinks that you're a threat, It doesn't matter. You are getting devoured. Period.
And she's going to think you're a threat.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah,
anything
regardless
that gets
of what your intentions
within
are.
like 100-mile radius of her cubs is like fair game for her.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing with bears. You can't really run from a bear.
Nope.
You can't climb up a tree from a bear. They will find you, and if they want you dead, there is not much you can do outside of praying to God and praying for a miracle that you're going... Like, the dude had a gun on him.
And I'm surprised that helped either. Like,
depends on the gun.
Well,
depends on the gun, because they didn't really say what caliber it was.
Yeah.
If it's a
also
45...
depends on the accuracy of the shooter as well.
Also, the thing with bears as well is, like, loud noises like that can scare them. So, because that actually happened one time, these kayakers were going down this very shallow creek in Alaska, and they see 3 bear cubs on the edge of the creek just drinking water and playing and all that. Then all of a sudden, they knew they were in trouble.
Across the creek at them.
They knew they were in trouble because they were just like, Shh, those are cubs. Shh, we got to get out of here. We got to go. And as soon as they say that, the guy was recording it. He like pans over and he sees this brush of trees just like fold over, and a mama bear just comes charging at him, ears back, mouth wide open. This guy pulls up his gun and fires it at the ground in front of the mama grizzly. She turns around and she runs off. And then the cubs run off
I've
as well.
seen that clip. It's freaking terrifying.
It is. It's one of the most terrifying, like shit your pants scenarios ever that I could imagine.
It's like that one and the guy that had to back all the way down a trail with a cougar, like
I've
right in
seen
front
that
of him.
one.
Like those 2 clips are terrifying.
Yeah.
Nature is
like,
not your
kitty,
friend.
good kitty. Like,
This is an important lesson, everybody. Nature is not your friend.
Nope.
It never has been, never will be.
It's fascinating, but it's also terrifying.
Going to say Grizzly. It's like
sorry.
the movie Grizzly Man. You ever heard of that? Grizzly Man.
Mm-mm.
There was a movie. It was about this guy who was obsessed with grizzly bears. You know, he went out and lived in the wilderness amongst grizzly bears and all that. But he was also out there with his girlfriend one time, and they were camping out, or I think they were in their cabin or I can't remember if it was their cabin or in a tent. A grizzly that was very hungry and woke up early from hibernation found them and began ripping them apart. And this guy had like film, like he'd filmed like his expeditions to like find these grizzly bears and everything. And well, the camera didn't show what was happening, but you could hear everything, including him and his girlfriend getting ripped apart and them screaming. And they didn't play it in the film. They like Werner Herzog, the guy that completed the documentary, he wore the headphones and he listened to them all the way through. And the tape belonged to like the last known family member of the guy, of the grizzly man. And Werner Herzog basically was just like the guy asked Werner, he was just like, do you want to use this for the film? And Werner says, no one should ever hear this, and I think you should have it destroyed. Like, that's how bad it was. And yeah, it's pretty. Nature does not play by your rules, and you shouldn't expect it to, and nature will eat you up.
You know what popped into my head?
What?
That dumb ways to die.
Yeah. It's pretty bad.
Photographs that Charles would take of these bears were shot from a good distance away, and it just showed the mother bear and her 3 babies just kind of sauntering around the rocks, not really paying any attention to Charles. To Charles, grizzly bears were the most majestic creatures in nature. He didn't just love them, he viewed them as if they were sort of magical in some way. He was always going to local town meetings to speak about grizzly bears' beauty, and we needed to defend their natural habitat.
How'd that work out for you, Charles? Don't get me wrong, I think nature conservation is a very important thing. I think it is very important to preserve nature and preserve the beauty and the bounty of nature. But
But you should
Preserve
also
it from a distance.
conserve your own life as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Self-preservation is also a very important thing.
As such, anyone who knew Charles knew
Of
about
course,
his
everybody
passion
has
for grizzly.
mad respect for Steve Irwin, and he gave his life
Yeah, rest
doing
in
nature
peace, Steve.
conservation.
And his son, you know, his son's like following step for step the same path. Plus, what happened to Steve was a literal freak occurrence. Like no one.
He was
expected
really
that.
smart and safe, like 100% of the time. So
Yes.
the fact that happened is still just ridiculous.
Yes.
And while of course Charles knew that grizzly bears were dangerous, he also thought that the bears, who were very smart and sensitive, could sense his own very gentle and protective feelings towards them, and so if he was around them, they would never perceive him as a threat.
Okay. Never think, don't assume, because all it does is make an ass out of you and me. Don't assume. Just be logical, man. These are beasts. These are literal monsters of the forest that can swat your head off with one swipe of their hand. Especially if it's a mother grizzly bear with cubs. God, if you're a smart nature guy, you should know. Do not approach. Do not fucking approach. Doesn't matter how good of a picture you want to get. God. Darwin Award, ladies and gentlemen. This man deserves it.
Charles had taken some very good photos of other bears, black bears, but he had never taken what he called the definitive grizzly bear photo. And it was going to be this definitive grizzly photo of the mother and her 3 cubs that would finally get him a spot in the Hungry Horse News publication. As Charles took more and more photos of these bears, you could see in the photos that Charles was getting closer and closer and closer to this mother bear and her cubs. It was obvious that he was tracking them, even as the mother bear and the cubs were clearly trying to walk away from him. Finally, when Charles got about 50 feet away from this family of grizzly bears, he must have kicked a rock or stepped on a twig that broke that startled the bears. And so the second to last photo that Charles would take of this family shows the mother bear very clearly turning around to look at Charles. And she's making...
Right, yeah, right there.
That was the moment he was screwed.
Yeah. Yeah, Mama Bear looking at him just being like... It's like, kids, go over there real quick. Mama's got to handle some business.
Making perfect eye contact with him, as is one of her cubs. Charles would take one more photo, and in this photo, you can see the bears are not just staring at Charles, they are running towards him. They are charging him. And it was likely after taking this photo that Charles realized the danger he was in. At this point, Charles tried to make a run for it by running down the side of this mountain. He got down to that tree with the low-hanging limbs, and he attempted to climb up into it, maybe hoping he could get one more picture of this bear if they would just leave him alone. But the mother bear and her cubs, they came charging down. They saw him up in the tree, and the mother bear began climbing into the tree, and she reached Charles. Now, she likely weighed about 400 pounds, and when mother grizzly bears are defending their young, they are absolutely merciless.
Yes.
And so she must have grabbed him or bit onto him and yanked him from the tree, and Charles somehow, after being pulled to the ground and getting slashed and bit by this bear, he managed to break away from her, as we can tell from the blood trail, and he made it about 50 feet away from this tree before the bear chased him down again, jumped on top of him, and killed him. When authorities figured out that Charles had managed to briefly get away from this mother grizzly bear and made it 50 feet away from her, they wondered why he hadn't pulled out his gun and shot at the bears to defend himself. But Charles's wife, Glenda, said it made perfect sense that Charles had not tried to harm this grizzly bear or her cubs. He loved grizzly bears, and he would never dream of leaving these 3 cubs without their mother.
But that...
He still should have shot the gun to try to scare her, obviously.
Yeah, exactly, because that loud noise would have probably made a difference in terms of making her think twice, because it's been proven that it works before. Like, it's been proven that loud noises like that scare off wildlife, and that's why. And also, you know, the 3 gunshots that the park ranger took, that because you see, a human being hears that, especially like out in the wilderness like that, they're like, huh, what was that? Animals hear that. That is not a noise that they are used to, and a lot of times, if it's close enough, they'll run off because they think something's wrong.
Yeah.
And it's been shown, like, birds like fly off, deer run off, bears run off. It's a powerful tool that does not have to be lethal.
Yeah.
But lethality is definitely it's something that every gun has. But yeah, anyway.
After Charles's death, the Rangers did not attempt to track down this bear and her cubs and do anything to the bears because they felt like the bears were just acting like bears and it was Charles who was in the wrong. And Charles's family and friends would say that is a decision that Charles would definitely support. Charles's photos of the grizzly bear family were published in the Hungry Horse News alongside an article about his death.
Wildlife is dangerous. No, not approach or feed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Damn.
So that's going to do it.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed today's story, be sure to check out our podcast. We have over 100 episodes. Many of them are exclusive to the podcast, so you can't get them on YouTube. The podcast is just called the Mr. Ballin Podcast, and it's available exclusively on Amazon Music.
We need to watch that. This national park has a death trap video next time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That one's definitely that one definitely is a must. Anyway, though, yeah, that was definitely a terrifying ending. I mean, and his curiosity wound up getting him killed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is hands down, like, I'm not gonna say the man did not have good intentions. The man had good intentions, but
he just
didn't have.
Yeah, he made a bad choice.
Yeah, he had a very, very bad.
It's not the
ideal.
Stupidest Darwin Award I've ever heard of.
No, there's plenty more out there.
It's
but
like
it's
an
still
honorable Darwin mention, basically.
Yeah, it's still worthy of
it's
being
like you
on
were
the list.
gambling very hard with your own life by going to try to photograph a grizzly with cubs.
Yes.
Like, if it had just been the grizzly and not the cubs, I would be like, okay, that was still a gamble, but that was not quite as dumb. The fact that if he knew that she had the cubs, which I'm assuming since he was snapping photos, obviously he knew that. Like, he should have got one picture at best and pieced out because, Jesus, like, he shouldn't have even gone for the one.
Hold on, let's see
Or at least he used his zoom and not gotten so close.
Yeah, I'd say just like in general though, if you're within eyesight of them, like even with a zoom, like they can see you too. So.
Let's see. 1987 is when this happened. So. Yep. I'm gonna say, let's see, photo. Grizzly bear photos.
Speaking of grizzly bears.
Yeah. You just hear him down there.
Snoring pupper sounds kind of like a bear.
Yeah. So many fucking ads, Jesus. Jesus, okay. You know, you click on something, it's just like, oh, like this is it's like this is the article I want to look at. Oh no, we're gonna automatically link you to a different. Yeah, we're gonna link you to a damn different one. It's like, Jesus Christ, why?
Because they get ad revenue for all of it. Look at all that revenue they're getting.
Yep. All right, but anyway, yeah. So, lesson learned, everybody. If you are going to be out in the woods, and if you see a grizzly bear,
or any kind of bear,
especially a cub,
especially a mama and her cubs. As a matter of fact, hold on.
Get the fuck out of Dodge.
Let's see. Oh, yeah. There it is. So, yeah. This is hands down, like, one of the most scary real-life, like, things. Is just, like... Yeah. Cubs. Just down here by the river. See this little brush of trees right here.
I was on a brown bear hunt in Alaska, and we got charged by a huge sow. Talk about a pucker factor? Well, that was one.
Let's go. Get out of here.
Damn.
She's so fast.
Like, you don't even have a chance to count to one before she's, like, right up on top of you.
Let's go. Get out of
here. Yeah. Right here. Like, that, like... The point you see her right there. The point you don't even see her face right there. The point you see her face, 1,000. Two, barely have a second before she was on you.
Damn.
And that's the thing. That's a brown bear. That's bigger than a grizzly. Like a brown bear can get up to about 800 pounds. They are monstrous. Like Kodiaks. Like Kodiak brown bears are just shoot.
Grizzlies are fucking huge too.
Yeah, grizzlies are pretty big. Let's see, how big can a grizzly bear get?
Down in Pigeon Forge, there was a place that had a stuffed grizzly, and just Jesus, man. Like, of course, it was up on a platform, but just looking up at it, and just like, that's a literal, like, monster.
Adult males, 400 to 600 pounds. How big can Kodiak bears get? There they are. 1,500 pounds.
Damn.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's like the bull males. The bull males can get 10 feet tall and weigh up to 1,500 pounds. So I was lowballing it. And look at this. So a grizzly bear is like a Volkswagen.
So maybe that was a Kodiak bear that I actually saw stuffed.
Yeah. Say what, Kate?
I was just saying it compares them.
Yeah.
That's cool. So
imagine, if you will, like a grizzly bear is like a Volkswagen charging you. A furry Volkswagen charging you. A Kodiak is like a fucking SUV charging you. That's what and they're both extremely fat. Like, look at this. Look at that. Yeah, some of them are like civilized. There was one Bart the bear.
I love his derpy looking face.
Yeah. Bart the bear. There he is. Ha ha. He was 9'6", and he was a bear that was very often used in films. Yeah. And then there's Bart the Bear 2, Bart's son. Yeah, he passed away in 2021. But yeah, he was almost as big as his pop. Yeah.
Was he in Game of Thrones?
Yes.
Oh.
That was him. He's the one that fought...
That's cool.
He's the one that fought Brienne, yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. God.
I wonder how they filmed that.
Oh, well, Bart... Well, I saw the video, like, when they had Bart in the movie The Edge, which had, like, Alec Baldwin and Anthony Hopkins.
Mm-hmm.
And the main thing that, it was, as long as you didn't startle Bart, he didn't get, like, really defensive or anything. He was a very, lackadaisical kind of bear. But whenever it came, like, serious time to shoot, the trainer would basically, like, have a, like, just do, like, a little, like, exercise with him to, like, get him in play mode.
Mm-hmm.
And thus they would film Bart. They would, like, pad someone up, like, put pads on their chest. And, like, if, like, it required, like, Bart to, like, bite them in the chest, they'd show Bart, like, hey, bite here where the brace is. And then they would use that, and they would basically just, like, have the stunt person take the hit a little bit. And then, of course, like, for swipes and all that, that was often too dangerous. Even if you filed down Bart's, like, claw tips that would not, like, it would still hurt a lot. So what they would often do is they would, with like perception tricks, they'd be like, the person would be right here, Bart's swipe would be like right here, but from over the shoulder, it's like they would swipe and they would act like they got hit, and they would do several takes of that for it to look good. And you see, I love the fact that this is a real thing. And oh yeah, Dr. Dolittle too. Yeah. Oh man.
How many movies was he in?
Let's see. They actually had an IMDb page for him, or a Wikipedia. There he is. Bart the Bear, a.k.a. Little Bart. He was in Dr. Dolittle 2, Without a Paddle, An Unfinished Life, Evan Almighty, Into the Wild. Wow. Man.
Really?
Yeah.
I love that
He was the
movie.
bear that approached him outside of the bus.
Yeah.
Then Zookeeper, We Bought a Zoo, and then Into the Grizzly Maze. And then television, he was in all these here. And, yeah, 21 years old, unfortunately. But, yeah.
What's their lifespan?
Their lifespan, I think it's around 25 to 30 years. 20, 30, I think. For some bears, it's, let's see, Kodiak bear lifespan. Yeah, 20 to 25 years. So he lived a full life by comparison. Both him and Bart, Bart 1 did. Just the fact that this exists, trained bears that are basically like giant puppy dogs.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to meet one. I'd love to go and meet a Kodiak bear that's been trained like that.
Yeah.
Just so I could be around it and there wouldn't be any danger of me, like dying or anything like that.
Yeah.
The chance would not be zero by all means, but the chance would still be like pretty
Less
good
than
that I would come out
to
of
pet
it.
a wild one.
Oh hell no! I ain't petting no wild one, bro. You couldn't pay. I'd probably die. Chances are I would die. But yeah, this right here, I love, and Bart Jr. was 8'6" according to 8'6", and Bart Sr. was 9'7". That's how almost 10 feet tall. Look at him.
What movie was?
Oh yeah, he was in White Fang, Legends of the Fall, The Edge, a lot of big movies from the 90s and 80s. Oh yeah, The Great Outdoors. He was the bald-headed man. God, I forgot about that. I love that movie. Oh, Homeward Bound. He was the bear in Homeward Bound. 12 Monkeys, Walking Thunder, The Edge. That was his last big film before he started getting sick. And I think for Meet the Deedles, he was I think they mostly had him just stand around. They didn't have him really do anything.
Mm-hmm.
But The Edge, he was when I saw that, I was terrified of bears.
Mm-hmm.
You ever seen The Edge?
No.
Whew. It's about these two guys. They're one of them's a billionaire and the other one's I forget. He's like a commercial pilot, and they know each other because the billionaire's wife recommended the pilot for the job, and they basically are just stranded in the wild together, and they have to survive, and it's basically just it's super survival minimalist stuff that I really like that whenever they do films that they make entertaining like that. Some are good like that, some are bad like The Hunted. Oh god, that was such a bad film.
I still want to watch what was that one that Leo was in?
The Revenant.
Yeah, The Revenant.
The Revenant,
Sometime.
I will say this, The Revenant is beautifully shot. Its pacing is a little bit there's a little bit too much of just enjoying the scenery for me. The scenery was great. Some of the best shots I've ever seen in a film, period. But if the editing had just been paced up just a little bit, I think it would have been that much better of a film. But still, it's a great film. I definitely recommended watch on my behalf.
Yeah, I'd still like to check it out sometime.
We'll have to do that. I'll have to see if we can't get the 4K Blu-ray and check it out sometime. But everybody, this was Mr. Ballin. The curiosity led to a terrible ending. And if you all want to see more from Mr. Ballin, click his name in the title of the video. And until next time, I'm Nate.
I'm Kate.
I am Nick.
And we'll see you later, everybody. Peace.